The sun was sliding low, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. In a small village in Nigeria, the air smelled faintly of wet earth and burning firewood. A young girl named Amora walked down the narrow dirt path, her bare feet crunching on the stones. Her clothes were worn and patched, but her eyes held a quiet determination that made her seem older than her 16 years. At the edge of the village, there was a small, fragile house. Inside lived an old widow, Mama Aisha, who had been sick for months. Her cough rattled in her chest like a trapped bird, and she rarely left her bed. Amora had grown up hearing whispers about how no one could help Mama Aisha anymore, how the sickness had taken everyone else's hope. But Amora felt a spark inside her that refused to let the widow be forgotten. Every morning, she would rise before the sun, fetching water from the well, walking extra miles to gather firewood, and cooking simple meals she knew the widow could eat without trouble. Her hands were often raw and cracked from the work, but she never complained. In return, Mama Aisha would offer stories from long ago, tales of love and loss, of courage and survival, that seemed to bloom even in the tiny dark room. Amora listened like she was drinking every word, feeling the life and warmth seep into her own heart. Some villagers whispered behind their hands, questioning why a poor girl would devote herself to a dying woman who could never repay her. Amora never answered them. Her days were measured by the rhythm of care, washing, cooking, and sitting beside the widow, holding her frail hand. Slowly, she began to notice little things, small signs that Mama Aisha was not entirely lost. Her eyes sometimes sparkled when Amora hummed softly. She would occasionally reach out to touch the girl's arm, a faint smile breaking through her tired expression. One evening, the sky deepened into a purple twilight, and Amora brought the widow a cup of warm soup. As she leaned over, Mama Aisha whispered something that made Amora freeze. She told her about a place far away, a river that shimmered like glass under the moonlight, and a flower that could cure sickness if it bloomed in the heart of one who truly loved. Amora's eyes widened. Could it be real, or was it just a story? Yet she could feel a pulse of hope in Mama Aisha's voice, and something in her gut told her that she had to try. Amora began to plan her journey in secret. Each day, while gathering firewood or water, she thought about the river and the flower. She imagined herself walking across hills, through forests, and over streams, guided by the story that Mama Aisha had whispered. Her heart beat faster with every passing day, torn between the fear of leaving the widow and the hope of finding something that could save her. The villagers continued to watch her silently, some shaking their heads, some whispering encouragement she never heard. One morning, as the first light of dawn broke through the haze, Amora held Mama Aisha's hand and said quietly, "I will find it, I will bring it back to you." The widow's eyes glimmered with a mix of worry and gratitude. She weakly nodded, gripping Amora's hand with surprising strength, as if passing on the last bit of her energy. That moment, fleeting as it was, cemented Amora's resolve. Whatever challenges awaited her, she would not falter. She would risk everything to give Mama Aisha a chance to live again. Even as Amora packed a small bundle of food and wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders, she felt the weight of the unknown pressing down. The village seemed quiet, almost holding its breath as she stepped onto the path that would take her beyond familiar fields and into the mystery of the world beyond. She glanced back once, seeing Mama Aisha's frail figure through the doorway, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. Then she turned, letting the early wind push her forward, and with each step, the story of her courage and devotion began to take shape. The sun climbed higher, warming her face, and with every heartbeat, Amora carried the widow's hope like a fragile bird in her chest, ready to soar or fall, depending on the journey ahead. The village faded behind her, replaced by the endless stretch of trees and rivers and unknown paths. Every sound, every shadow, every whisper of the wind seemed to guide her toward the river that might hold the cure, toward the promise that a single act of love could change everything. Amora walked for hours, the path twisting and turning through fields dotted with small huts and stretches of tall grass that tickled her legs. The sun was high, but she barely noticed its heat. Her mind was filled with the image of Mama Aisha, weak and coughing, yet clinging to the hope that Amora would return with something that could save her. Every step carried the weight of responsibility, yet also a strange thrill, a sense that she was doing something no one else had dared. The forest came first, a dense wall of green that hummed with life. Birds darted overhead, and insects buzzed in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Amora stepped carefully, listening to every crack of a twig underfoot, every rustle in the leaves. She imagined the river Mama Ife had spoken of somewhere beyond these trees, shimmering under moonlight, its water holding the promise of a miracle. Her imagination painted the flower too, a delicate bloom that seemed almost too beautiful to exist. She wanted to believe in it with all her heart. By midday, hunger gnawed at her. The bundle she carried was small, enough for a few meals, and she had already eaten half. She found a stream and dipped her hands in, drinking the cool water slowly. She watched her reflection, her face streaked with sweat and dirt, and wondered if she was brave enough for what lay ahead. The reflection looked back at her, not as a poor girl from a small village, but as someone who could change the course of a life. The thought lifted her spirits, and she pressed on. As she entered a darker section of the forest, the shadows grew thick. Branches scraped against her arms, and the air smelled damp and earthy. She paused, sensing a presence nearby. A small animal, a fox with bright eyes, watched her from between the roots of a tree. For a moment, she thought it was a sign, a guide perhaps, sent to show her the right path. The fox darted away suddenly, leaving her alone again. She followed instinct, stepping carefully, listening to the sound of the wind in the leaves, letting it guide her. Night fell quickly, swallowing the forest in deep blue darkness. Amora set up a tiny fire with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth and light. She ate a small piece of bread and sipped water, but sleep was hard to come by. The forest seemed alive, whispering to her in ways she couldn't understand. She imagined Mama Ife lying in her bed, coughing and shivering, and it made her stomach tighten. She whispered to the night, promising she would not fail. The next morning, the forest opened up into a wide clearing, and Amora could see hills rising in the distance. She felt a surge of hope. If she could just reach those hills, the river might be near. She climbed steadily, her legs burning, but she welcomed the ache as proof of her determination. From the top of a hill, she looked down and saw a winding path of silver water. Her heart leapt. The river. It had to be the one Mama Ife spoke of. She ran down the hill, her feet pounding the earth, every step echoing her excitement. As she approached the river, she noticed the water gleaming under the afternoon sun, reflecting everything around it as if it held secrets just beneath the surface. The banks were lined with small flowers, but none seemed to match the one from Mama Ife's story. She knelt by the water, cupping it in her hands and letting it trickle through her fingers. The cold made her shiver, but it also sharpened her mind. She had come so far, and she could not give up now. She wandered along the riverbank, searching for the flower, calling its name silently in her heart, willing it to appear. Hours passed, the sun beginning to sink again, and Amora felt the first sting of despair. Perhaps the flower was only a story, a dream too fragile to hold in reality. She sat by the river, head in her hands, and let her tears fall. The world seemed impossibly big, and she was just one small girl carrying someone else's hope. But then, as the first stars began to appear, a soft glow caught her eye. In the shadow of a large rock, a single flower grew, its petals shimmering in the moonlight. It was delicate, almost ethereal, and it seemed to pulse with a quiet energy. Amora froze, unable to believe her eyes. She approached slowly, careful not to disturb the ground around it. As she reached out, a sense of warmth filled her chest, a feeling that Mama Ife's life might truly be within her grasp. She carefully dug around the roots, keeping the flower intact, and wrapped it in a piece of cloth she had in her bundle. With the flower safely secured, she turned back to the path home. The night was dark and the forest felt more alive than ever, but Amora moved with purpose. She whispered to the trees, to the wind, as if asking them to guide her safely back. Every rustle and sound seemed to answer her, leading her step by step. Hours later, when the first light of dawn touched the village, Amora's feet carried her home. She arrived exhausted, dirt streaked across her face and her hair tangled from the journey. Mama Aif was waiting at the doorway, eyes widening as she saw Amora approaching. The sight of the flower in Amora's hands made the widow's lips tremble in a smile. It was more than hope now. It was proof. Amora knelt beside her, offering the fragile bloom. Mama Aif took it in her frail hands, a tear slipping down her cheek. The little house seemed to glow from the joy of that moment, a warmth neither of them had felt in months. Amora watched as Mama Aif held the flower close to her heart. The widow's breathing became steadier, the coughing quieted, and her eyes, for the first time in a long while, shone with life. Amora felt a surge of triumph and relief, knowing that every step, every hardship, had led to this miracle. That night, the village seemed to hum with quiet energy, though no one outside the small house knew why. Inside, hope had returned, and a girl's dedication had rewritten what everyone thought was impossible. The next morning, Amora sat with Mama Aif, watching the flower in a small pot on the windowsill. The old woman's hand brushed against her own, a simple gesture that carried all the gratitude and love that words could never capture. Amora knew the journey had changed her. She had discovered a courage she didn't know she had, and a love that could move mountains. Outside, the village awoke as usual, but inside the little house, life felt renewed. And somewhere in the quiet, unspoken understanding, Amora realized this was only the beginning of a story far bigger than herself. Amora spent the next days carefully tending to Mama Aif, who was slowly regaining her strength. Every morning, the old widow would sit by the window, the sunlight brushing her face, and she would tell stories of her youth. Stories that felt like treasures, each one filled with laughter and sorrow, lessons and regrets. Amora would sit cross-legged on the floor, listening with rapt attention, feeling the warmth of connection like a gentle fire. She realized that the flower was not just a cure, but a bridge, something that had restored not only the body but the soul. Word of the miracle began to spread quietly through the village. Some villagers came by, curious, peeking through windows or lingering by the doorway. They whispered, astonished that a poor girl had traveled far, faced dangers, and brought back a bloom that had given life to someone they had already mourned. Amora never boasted. She simply went about her daily tasks, feeding Mama Aif, gathering water, and making sure the flower thrived in the small pot on the windowsill. Yet, she began to notice small, subtle changes in herself. She walked taller, spoke with more confidence, and felt a quiet strength coursing through her that she had never known before. One evening, as the sky bled into shades of deep orange and purple, Amora sat outside, the air carrying the scent of dry earth and smoke from village fires. Mama Aif had fallen asleep inside, and the flower's glow seemed almost magical under the dim light. Amora traced the petals with her fingers, marveling at how fragile yet resilient it was. In that moment, she realized that the journey had taught her something profound. Love was not just about grand gestures or daring feats. It was about patience, devotion, and a willingness to keep going when everything seemed impossible. But life, as it often does, was not content to stay simple. One morning, a stranger arrived at the village. He was tall, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to weigh everyone he looked at. He carried a small leather satchel and wore clothes that smelled faintly of distant lands. The villagers whispered nervously, unsure whether to approach or hide. Amora, however, felt a strange pull toward him. There was something about his presence that made the air feel electric, charged with a tension she could not name. The man asked for directions to the widow's house. His voice was low, smooth, and carried an authority that demanded attention. Amora stepped forward, explaining the path carefully, though her heart thumped with unease. When he reached the doorstep and saw Mama Aif, his expression shifted, a flicker of emotion crossing his face before he masked it with a polite nod. He spoke briefly to Mama Aif, mentioning herbs and remedies from far-off places, herbs that could make her stronger, perhaps even cure ailments no one had thought possible. Curiosity and caution warred inside Amora. The man seemed kind, but there was something in the way he observed her, the flower, and Mama Aif that made her instinctively protective. Yet, Mama Aif, with a mischievous glint in her eye, urged Amora to listen. She said that sometimes help came from unexpected places, and that Amora should never close her heart to the unknown. Reluctantly, Amora agreed to let the stranger stay for a short while, watching closely as he prepared concoctions and gave instructions. Days turned into a week, and under the stranger's guidance, Mama Aif began to regain even more strength. Her skin grew less pale, her eyes brighter, and her laughter, faint but genuine, returned to the small house. Amora watched in awe as the widow walked short distances, her steps unsteady but determined. The stranger taught Amora how to care for Mama Aif with new techniques, showing her how to combine local herbs with simple rituals to strengthen the body. Each night, they sat together, and the stranger would tell stories of distant cities, rivers wider than any she had seen, and mountains that touched the clouds. But then, one evening, as the sky turned the color of molten copper, the stranger approached Amora quietly. He spoke with a serious tone that made her stomach twist. He warned her that the flower she had brought from the distant river was no ordinary bloom. Its magic was powerful, but it came with a cost. If it was removed or damaged, the effects could fade, and the life it had restored might be at risk. Amora's heart skipped a beat. She realized that the miracle she had witnessed was fragile, delicate as a thread, and she had to protect it with everything she had. The next morning, Amora woke early, sensing a shift in the air. Something was different. Mama Aif's movements seemed sharper, more intentional, but there was a tension beneath the surface, an undercurrent that Amora could not place. Villagers whispered that the old widow's sudden recovery had drawn attention from forces beyond their understanding. Some spoke of jealous spirits, others of luck running out. Amora, however, focused on what she could control: her care, her devotion, and the flower, now more precious than ever. One day, as she tended the garden outside the house, a group of children ran past her, chasing a small butterfly. Amora paused, watching their laughter and energy, and felt a pang of longing. For so long, she had carried responsibility on her shoulders, traveled alone, faced fears she had never imagined. But in that moment, she wondered what it might be like to have a life beyond devotion to another. She shook her head, reminding herself that the journey she had undertaken was not over. Mama Aif's life, the flower, and the fragile hope of a future depended on her vigilance. Then came a night when the winds howled fiercely, rattling the small house. Amora stayed by Mama Aif, holding her hand as the storm shook the walls. Rain battered the roof and windows, and the fire flickered dangerously. At one point, the flower tipped from the windowsill, its petals brushing the floor. Amora caught it just in time, holding it close to her chest, feeling its warmth against her fingers. She whispered promises into the storm, pledging to protect this fragile miracle with her life if she had to. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the village dripping and glistening under the pale light. Amora was exhausted, but a strange pride filled her. She had faced fear and chaos and preserved what mattered most. Mama Aif stirred beside her, weak but smiling, and Amora knew that every trial, every step of her journey, had brought them to this point. She began to understand that her story was no longer just about saving one person. It was about discovering a courage and resilience that could shape the world around her, even in a small village in Nigeria. The days that followed were filled with quiet triumphs and small joys. Mama Aif could walk to the well, carry her own meals, and even tend a small corner of the garden. The flower bloomed steadily, its glow steady and comforting. Amora felt a deep satisfaction, but also a restless pull, as if the world beyond the village had more to offer her, more challenges to test the limits of her strength and heart. She began to dream of what lay beyond the familiar paths, of adventures that might call her courage again, of mysteries that might demand her devotion in ways she could not yet imagine. In the evenings, she and Mama Aif would sit together by the fire, sharing stories and laughter. But sometimes, when the house was quiet, Amora would gaze out the window toward the distant hills and forests. The river she had crossed, the flower she had found, the stranger who had taught her new ways, all of it reminded her that life was vast, full of wonders and dangers alike. And in that quiet anticipation, she felt the pulse of a story still unfolding, a story that promised trials, surprises, and moments of magic she could barely dream of. Amora's heart was full of love, determination, and an unspoken promise. Whatever came next, she would meet it head-on, carrying hope like a lantern into the unknown, ready to protect the life she had fought to restore and to face challenges she could not yet imagine. The village slept, unaware of the fragile threads of fate weaving themselves into something extraordinary. But Amora knew. She could feel it in every beat of her heart, in every breath of the wind, in the quiet strength of Mama Ife's hand in hers. The journey had changed her forever, and the next chapter of her story, she could sense, would demand more than she had ever given before. The village awoke one morning to a quiet that felt different, as if the air itself held its breath. Amora was already awake, tending to Mama Ife, whose strength had grown steadily but still bore the memory of long illness. The flower glowed softly on the windowsill, its petals reflecting the morning light. Amora ran her fingers along its fragile edges and thought about how far she had come, from a girl with nothing to someone carrying hope for another life. She felt a deep sense of responsibility, but also a strange readiness, as if the world was about to test her in ways she could not yet imagine. That day, a letter arrived at the village, carried by a traveler on horseback. The villagers gathered in hushed curiosity, murmuring among themselves. Amora's eyes widened when she saw her name on the envelope, scrawled in careful handwriting. Inside, the letter spoke of a distant city, far beyond the mountains and rivers she had crossed, where healers and wise people gathered to share knowledge. It hinted that the flower she had found was part of something much bigger, a rare bloom connected to powers that could change lives far beyond her village. The letter asked her to bring it there, to ensure that its magic would not be lost. Amora's heart pounded. She had already risked everything for Mama Ife, yet this letter suggested that her journey was far from over. Mama Ife, sensing the conflict in her young companion, placed a gentle hand on Amora's shoulder. Her eyes shone with warmth and trust. She said softly, "The flower has healed me, but your heart has grown stronger through this. You were always meant to see more of the world. Go, my child. Let your courage carry you forward." The next morning, Amora packed her bundle carefully. The flower was wrapped securely, its glow protected by layers of cloth. She kissed Mama Ife's cheek, promising to return. The villagers, who had once doubted her, now gathered quietly, offering small gifts, prayers, and encouragement. As she stepped onto the road that led away from the village, she felt the weight of expectation, hope, and the unknown pressing on her shoulders. Every step carried memories of what she had already endured and glimpses of challenges yet to come. The journey took her through forests that seemed to breathe with life, hills that rose like sentinels against the horizon, and streams that whispered secrets she could almost understand. Each night, she made camp under the stars, listening to the wind and imagining the distant city. Sometimes she thought of Mama Ife, wondering how she was doing, and every time, she found renewed strength. The flower's glow provided comfort, a reminder that her journey was not just for herself but for someone whose life depended on her courage and care. Weeks passed, and the paths grew harder. She encountered wild animals, thick underbrush, and rivers that threatened to block her way. Each obstacle tested her resolve, yet she moved forward, guided by a mix of determination, love, and the whisper of something greater than herself. Occasionally, she met travelers, some helpful, some indifferent, but each encounter added a layer of understanding about the wider world. She learned to read the sky, to know which plants could heal and which could harm, and to trust her instincts even when fear rose in her chest. One night, as she rested beside a campfire, a shadow appeared near the edge of the clearing. Amora stiffened, her hand instinctively clutching the flower. A young boy stepped into the light, no older than 12, his clothes torn and face smudged with dirt. He introduced himself as Kimi and explained that he had been traveling alone, searching for his family who had been taken by illness far from their home. Amora's heart softened immediately. She offered him food and water and listened to his story by the firelight. Kimi's courage reminded her of herself, and in his presence, the weight of her journey felt lighter, shared with someone who needed hope as much as she did. Together, they traveled. Kimi proved resourceful, quick to spot danger and clever in finding food and shelter. Amora found herself teaching him small lessons about care, survival, and the quiet courage it took to keep moving even when fear gnawed at the edges of the heart. They crossed forests where the trees whispered ancient secrets, and climbed hills where the wind carried songs from faraway lands. Every night, they shared stories and laughter, and Amora realized that the journey itself was shaping her, teaching her resilience, compassion, and the value of trust. Finally, after what felt like endless days of walking, they reached the city described in the letter. It was unlike anything Amora had seen before. Tall buildings that seemed to touch the clouds, markets filled with colors, scents, and sounds from every corner of the world. People moved quickly, speaking languages that danced in unfamiliar patterns. Amora's eyes widened, her heart racing with excitement and nervousness. Kimi clung to her hand, equally overwhelmed. Yet, as they entered the city gates, she felt a pulse of purpose, knowing the flower's journey was not yet complete. The city's elders received them warmly. They were gentle but authoritative, and they spoke with a reverence for the flower that made Amora's pulse quicken. They explained that the bloom was one of the rarest in the world, capable of amplifying the life force of those it touched, but only when placed in the hands of someone who carried true love and devotion. They examined the flower carefully, their eyes reflecting awe and respect. Amora realized that what she had brought was more than just a plant. It was a symbol of the heart's power to heal, to endure, and to create miracles. Days turned into weeks as Amora and Kimi stayed in the city, learning from the elders and observing how the flower was nurtured to reach its full potential. Amora learned new ways to care for life, to blend patience with action, and to listen to the subtle language of nature. She realized that her journey had transformed her. She was no longer simply the poor girl from a small village. She was a bearer of hope, a guardian of life, and a bridge between what was fragile and what could be strong. Finally, the elders told Amora it was time to return home. The flower had achieved its full potential, its power amplified by her devotion, her courage, and her love. Amora hugged Kimi, who promised to return home to find his family, and began the long journey back to the village. Each step felt lighter, filled with a sense of fulfillment and quiet pride. She thought of Mama Aisha, imagining the joy that awaited when she returned. When she arrived, the village seemed unchanged on the surface, yet everything felt different. Mama Aisha ran to her, tears of joy streaming down her face. She embraced Amora tightly, whispering words of gratitude and pride. The villagers gathered, some with tears in their eyes, some with wide smiles. They had watched her leave as a girl with hope, and now she returned as someone transformed, carrying a story that would be told for generations. The flower, now more vibrant than ever, was placed in a special corner of the house. Mama Aisha touched it gently, feeling the energy it radiated. Amora realized that the journey had not ended. It had blossomed into something bigger. The love she had given, the courage she had summoned, and the sacrifices she had made had created a ripple that could change lives far beyond her village. In the evenings, as the sun set, Amora would sit with Mama Aisha by the window, telling stories of the journey, of distant forests and mountains, of a city filled with knowledge and wonder. Kimi visited occasionally, and together, they shared laughter, memories, and lessons learned. Amora felt the pulse of life stronger than ever, and she knew that no matter what the future held, she had discovered something eternal: the power of devotion, courage, and love. The village, once quiet and ordinary, seemed to glow with a new energy, as if the hope carried by one brave girl had seeped into every heart. And Amora, looking at Mama Aisha and the glowing flower, knew that stories like hers were not just told, they were lived, step by step, through every act of kindness, bravery, and unwavering love. Her journey had begun as a quest to save one life, but it had grown into a testament to what the human heart could achieve, leaving a mark that would endure long after the sun set on the small village in Nigeria. And that's the incredible journey of Amora, a brave girl whose love and courage changed a life and touched a whole village. From a simple act of devotion to a story of hope, resilience, and miracles, her tale reminds us that even the smallest hearts can carry the greatest power. If this story inspired you, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next adventure. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments which country you're watching from and what time it is where you are right now. Your story matters to us, and we can't wait to share more unforgettable tales with you.